What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because today we're diving into one of the most shocking crime stories you'll hear all year. We're talking about the biggest jewelry heist in American history, $100 million worth of diamonds and gold stolen in broad daylight, and here's the kicker. The main suspect just walked away. He's gone, deported, and he'll probably never face trial. This story has everything. A carefully planned robbery, federal investigators, immigration authorities, and a massive failure in the justice system that let one of the biggest criminals in recent history slip right through their fingers. So buckle up, because this is going to be wild. Let's get into it. The setup. Our story begins in the summer of 2022 in Southern California. Now, if you know anything about California, you know it's home to some of the wealthiest people in the country. Massive mansions, luxury cars, and of course, expensive jewelry. But this story isn't about some celebrity getting robbed at their beach house. This is way bigger. This is about professional criminals who pulled off what authorities believe is the largest jewelry heist in United States history. In July of 2022, there was a major international jewelry show happening near San Francisco. Think about it like this: jewelry dealers, collectors, and sellers from all over the world bringing their most valuable pieces to show off and sell. We're talking diamonds the size of your thumbnail, emeralds worth more than most people's houses, custom designer watches that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars each, gold pieces, rubies, you name it. This event was basically a treasure trove on wheels once it was over, because all of this expensive merchandise had to be transported back to its owners. That's where Brinks comes in. You've probably seen their armored trucks before, the big heavy vehicles that transport money and valuables. They're supposed to be ultra secure, impossible to rob. Well, the people organizing this jewelry show hired Brinks to transport all these valuable items safely. The jewelry was loaded into a Brinks tractor trailer, locked up tight, and ready to make the journey south from the San Francisco area down to Los Angeles. Now here's where our main character enters the story. Jason Nilon Priscilla Flores. Remember that name because it's important. Flores wasn't some random street criminal. According to investigators, he and his accomplices had done their homework. They knew about the jewelry show. They knew when the Brinks truck would be moving, and they had a plan. The heist, picture this. It's a hot summer day in California, and this massive Brinks tractor trailer is cruising down the highway heading south toward Los Angeles. Inside that truck is literally a fortune in jewelry. The driver has no idea that he's being followed, but he is. Flores and his crew are tailing this truck, staying just far enough back not to raise suspicion, but close enough to keep eyes on their target. Now, the thing about driving from San Francisco to Los Angeles is that it's a long trip. We're talking hours on the road, and when you're driving for that long, eventually you need to take a break. The driver of this Brinks truck did exactly what thousands of truck drivers do every single day. He pulled into a rest stop to take a break. But this wasn't just any rest stop. This was a rural rest stop north of Los Angeles. Not a lot of people around, not a lot of witnesses. Just a tired truck driver taking a break from the road, probably thinking his cargo was safe because it was locked up in an armored vehicle. That's when Flores and his team made their move. We don't know all the exact details of how they pulled it off, but somehow these guys managed to break into that supposedly secure Brinks truck and steal the cargo. We're talking about millions upon millions of dollars worth of jewelry, diamonds, emeralds, gold, designer watches, rubies. They grabbed everything they could and disappeared. When the theft was discovered, it sent shockwaves through the jewelry industry and law enforcement. This wasn't a smash and grab at a local jewelry store. This was a sophisticated, planned operation targeting a secured shipment from an international jewelry show. The victims started reporting their losses, and this is where things get really interesting. The people who owned this jewelry claimed their losses totaled over $100 million. Let me say that again. $100 million. That's an insane amount of money. To put it in perspective, that's enough money to buy over 300 average houses in America, or about 25 private jets, or you could literally live off that money for multiple lifetimes. But here's where it gets complicated. Brinks, the armored car company that was supposed to be protecting this jewelry, valued the haul at less than $10 million. Now you might be wondering, how can the victims say it's worth $100 million while Brinks says it's worth less than 10? Well, this comes down to insurance valuations. actual market value versus insured value, and probably some legal battles over who's responsible for the loss. But whether it was 10 million or 100 million, one thing was clear. This was the biggest jewelry heist in American history. The investigation. So now law enforcement has a massive crime on their hands. The FBI gets involved because this crosses state lines and involves major federal crimes. Investigators start piecing together what happened. They look at surveillance footage from the rest stop and the surrounding highways. They interview witnesses. They track down leads. And eventually they identify their main suspect, Jason Nelon Priscilla Flores. Flores gets arrested and charged with some serious federal crimes. We're talking about stalking an armored truck and stealing millions worth of jewelry. These are the kind of charges that could land someone in prison for decades. The federal prosecutors start building their case. They've got evidence. They've got witnesses. They're preparing to take this to trial and put away the person responsible for the biggest jewelry heist in U.S. history. But here's where our story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. You see, Flores wasn't born in the United States. He was originally from Ecuador, a country in South America. However, he was a lawful permanent resident of the United States. That means he had a green card. He was living here legally, working here legally, building a life here. But when you're a permanent resident and not a citizen, there are certain things that can get you deported, and being charged with serious federal crimes is definitely one of them. After his arrest, Flores was released on bail while awaiting trial. This is pretty standard in the American justice system. Unless someone is considered a major flight risk or danger to the community, they can often post bail and wait for their trial at home instead of in jail. But in September, something changed. Flores was transferred to ICE custody. ICE, for those who don't know, stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They're the federal agency responsible for enforcing immigration laws and deporting people who are in the country illegally or who have violated the terms of their legal status. The shocking decision. Now, being in ICE custody while facing serious federal charges created a very unusual situation for Flores. He had to make a choice, and it was a choice that would determine the entire rest of his life. On one hand, he could fight his criminal case. He could go to trial, try to prove his innocence, or get a reduced sentence. But if he lost, which seemed likely given the evidence against him, he was looking at potentially decades in federal prison. And then, after serving that sentence, he would almost certainly be deported back to Ecuador anyway because of his felony convictions. On the other hand, there was another option. He could request something called voluntary departure. Basically, this means he could agree to leave the United States on his own, waiving his immigration rights and accepting deportation without fighting it. And here's the crazy part. By doing this, he could potentially avoid the criminal prosecution altogether. Think about the calculus here for a second. If you're facing 20 or 30 years in federal prison followed by deportation, or you could just skip the prison part and go straight to deportation, what would you choose? For Flores, the choice was clear. He requested voluntary departure. Now, you'd think that federal prosecutors would be all over this. You'd think they'd be screaming, "Wait a minute. This guy is our main suspect in the biggest jewelry heist in American history. You can't just let him leave the country." But here's the absolutely shocking part of this story. The federal prosecutors say they had no idea this was happening. They claim they were completely unaware that Flores had an immigration detainer or that ICE was planning to deport him. In late December, while federal prosecutors were still preparing their case for trial, ICE put Flores on a plane and deported him to Ecuador. Just like that, he was gone. The main suspect in a $100 million heist was allowed to leave the country and return home, potentially never to face justice for one of the biggest crimes in American history. The fallout. When this news broke, legal experts were absolutely stunned. Former prosecutors, immigration lawyers, criminal defense attorneys, everyone who works in the justice system was asking the same question. How did this happen? How could ICE deport a major criminal defendant without coordinating with the federal prosecutors who were building a case against him? One former federal prosecutor, a woman named Lori Levinson, who has decades of experience in these cases, spoke to the media about this situation. She said it was beyond her understanding how ICE would deport someone like Flores without prosecutors being in on the conversation. She called it a classic case of the left hand not knowing what the right hand was doing, and she's absolutely right. This represents a massive breakdown in communication between different parts of the federal government. Think about all the resources that went into this case. FBI agents investigating the crime, tracking down leads, building evidence, federal prosecutors preparing legal documents, interviewing witnesses, getting ready for trial. All those hours, all that taxpayer money, all that effort to catch and prosecute the person responsible for the biggest jewelry heist in U.S. history. And then ICE just deports him without telling anyone. It's like if you spent months preparing for the biggest test of your life, and then someone came in and canceled the test without telling you. The situation gets even more complicated when you look at what happened after the deportation. Flores' attorney, seeing that his client was now safely back in Ecuador and out of reach of U.S. law enforcement, filed a motion to dismiss the charges, and not just dismiss them temporarily, but dismiss them permanently. The argument is basically, my client is gone, he's not coming back, there's no point in keeping these charges hanging over his head. But federal prosecutors don't want to let him off that easy. They filed their own motion asking the judge to dismiss the case without prejudice. This is a legal term that basically means the charges are dropped for now, but if Flores ever comes back to the United States, they can bring the charges right back. It keeps the door open for future prosecution. The bigger picture. So what does this all mean? Well, on one level, it means that the person accused of pulling off the biggest jewelry heist in American history got away with it. He's back home in Ecuador, probably living off whatever share of that $100 million he managed to keep or hide. The victims of this crime, the people who lost their valuable jewelry, they're probably never going to see justice. The jewelry is gone, likely sold off piece by piece or melted down, scattered across black markets around the world. But on a deeper level, this case exposes some serious problems in how different parts of the U.S. government work together, or in this case, fail to work together. Immigration enforcement and criminal prosecution are supposed to coordinate on cases like this. There are supposed to be systems in place to make sure that ICE doesn't deport someone who's a key defendant in a major federal case. But those systems clearly failed here. Some people might argue that Flores made a smart choice. He was facing decades in prison, and by accepting deportation, he avoided that fate. From his perspective, going back to Ecuador was the better option. He gets to be free, back in his home country, instead of rotting in an American prison cell. And legally, he had every right to request voluntary departure. The law allowed him to make that choice. But others would say this represents a massive failure of justice. A person accused of a $100 million heist shouldn't be able to just opt out of facing trial by leaving the country. The victims of this crime deserve their day in court. The American justice system is supposed to hold people accountable for crimes this serious. And the fact that Flores was able to slip away because of bureaucratic confusion or lack of coordination is deeply troubling. There's also a broader question here about how the immigration system interacts with the criminal justice system. This isn't the first time something like this has happened, and it probably won't be the last. When someone is both a criminal defendant and an immigration detainee, there are competing interests at play. The criminal justice system wants to prosecute crimes and hold people accountable. The immigration system wants to enforce immigration laws and remove people who violate their status. Sometimes these goals align, but sometimes they conflict, and this case is a perfect example of that conflict. What happens now? So where do things stand now? Well, Flores is back in Ecuador, and unless he decides to return to the United States, which seems extremely unlikely, he'll probably never face trial for this crime. The federal prosecutors have their case dismissed without prejudice, which means if he ever does come back, they can revive the charges, but realistically, that's probably never going to happen. Ecuador, like many countries, doesn't typically extradite its own citizens to face charges in other countries, so even if the U.S. government wanted to bring Flores back to face trial, they'd have a very hard time making that happen. He's essentially beyond the reach of American law enforcement now. The jewelry that was stolen is gone. Some of it may have been recovered, but the vast majority of that $100 million worth of diamonds, gold, and precious stones is out there somewhere, probably sold off and scattered across the globe. The victims of this heist have likely filed insurance claims and are trying to recover their losses that way, but for many of them, this represents irreplaceable pieces that they'll never see again. As for Brinks, the armored car company that was supposed to be protecting this shipment, they're facing lawsuits and scrutiny over how this heist was able to happen in the first place. How did criminals manage to break into their supposedly secure truck? What security measures failed? These are questions that insurance companies and lawyers will be battling over for years to come. Lessons and reflections. This whole saga raises some important questions that go beyond just this one case. First, it highlights the need for better coordination between different federal agencies. The fact that ICE and federal prosecutors weren't communicating about such a major case is unacceptable. There need to be systems in place to prevent this from happening again. Second, it makes us think about the trade-offs in our justice system. Should someone facing serious criminal charges be allowed to avoid prosecution by accepting deportation? On one hand, you could argue that deportation is itself a serious consequence, especially for someone who was a lawful permanent resident building a life in the United States. On the other hand, it seems wrong that someone can avoid accountability for a major crime just by leaving the country. Third, this case demonstrates the challenges of prosecuting sophisticated criminals in a globalized world. These weren't amateur thieves. This was a planned operation that targeted a specific shipment and executed the heist successfully, and in the end, the main suspect was able to escape justice by crossing an international border. As crime becomes more international and sophisticated, our justice system needs to adapt. Outrow. So there you have it. The incredible story of the $100 million jewelry heist and the suspect who got away. It's a story that has everything: a daring robbery, millions in stolen treasure, federal investigations, and a shocking escape from justice. It's the kind of story that seems like it should be a Hollywood movie, except it's all real, and it just happened. What do you think about this case? Do you think Flores made a smart decision by accepting deportation, or should he have faced trial? Do you think the system failed by letting him leave the country? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you all think about this crazy situation. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell so you never miss when we drop new content. We've got more wild true crime stories, crazy news, and unbelievable cases coming your way.